He let the Apache sisters escape on his best mule, and their father came before dark. The morning sun rose slowly over the rugged canyon, spilling golden light across the rocky cliffs and dusty trails. The air was dry and sharp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant, faint smell of smoke from a campfire long abandoned. The canyon was quiet except for the occasional rustle of a lizard slipping over the rocks or the distant call of a hawk circling above. In this lonely landscape, few travelers dared to venture, and even fewer stayed for long, but one man knew this land as well as anyone could. He had spent years walking these trails, mapping every ridge and ravine in his mind. He was a solitary figure, a man in his late 40s with weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much of the harsh world. His clothes were simple but sturdy: patched trousers, a faded shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shielded his face from the unforgiving sun. On his back, a worn leather satchel carried only what was necessary: a small knife, a few rations, and a water skin. His mule, a strong and steady companion, plodded beside him, sure-footed and patient. This mule had carried him through countless journeys, across rivers and ridges, and through the lonely stretches of desert where the land seemed to stretch forever, with no sign of life. As he moved through a narrow passage between two towering cliffs, he noticed a movement ahead. At first, it was easy to mistake for a shadow or a trick of the morning light. But as he slowed, squinting against the glare, he saw two figures, two young women, moving cautiously along the trail. They were not his people, and they did not carry themselves like travelers of the trade routes he was familiar with. Something about their hurried, anxious movements told him they were running from something, or perhaps someone. The man's first instinct was caution. He had learned long ago that appearances could be deceptive in these parts. He studied them carefully, noticing the way they supported each other, the way they kept glancing over their shoulders, and the careful way they navigated the rocky terrain. Their clothes were simple, worn from travel but clean, and their hair, dark and shiny, was tied back neatly. They moved like survivors, used to the hardships of the wilderness, yet with a hint of desperation that made him pause. He stopped behind a large boulder, using it as cover, and watched them. His mind raced with questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? And why were they here, in this remote canyon where few dared to venture? He could see the smaller of the two struggling to keep up, stumbling over loose stones. It was clear they were not familiar with the trails, and yet they seemed determined to move forward, pushing through exhaustion and fear. As he observed, he noticed a small mule following the sisters, carrying a few bundles tied with cloth. It was a weak-looking animal, clearly overburdened and struggling on the rocky path. He knew immediately that if they were to make it through the canyon safely, they would need help, though helping strangers in these parts was never without risk. His hand rested on the hilt of his knife, a habit more of instinct than fear. But even as he considered turning away and letting them face the canyon alone, something inside him stirred, a sense of duty, or perhaps compassion. He could not explain it, but he felt he could not simply watch them struggle and do nothing. He moved slowly, keeping to the shadows and choosing the path that would not alert them to his presence. As he got closer, he could hear faint whispers. The sisters spoke in low tones, their words hurried and urgent. Though he did not understand their language fully, the tone was unmistakable. Fear mixed with determination. They were not running aimlessly. They had a destination in mind, though he could not know what it was. The man continued to follow them for some distance, careful not to make a sound. The canyon was narrow here, the cliffs rising sharply on either side, and the trail was treacherous. Loose stones threatened to send them or their mule tumbling down the slope. He could see the younger sister stumble, almost falling, and the older one quickly reached out to steady her. There was a bond between them, a silent understanding that spoke louder than words. They were counting on each other, relying on one another for survival. At one point, the sisters paused near a small stream trickling through the rocks. The younger one knelt to drink, cupping the water in her hands, while the older one scanned the canyon with sharp eyes. The man watched from his hiding place, noticing the way the older sister's hands shook slightly as she held the mule's reins. He could see fear etched into their faces, but also courage. They were frightened, yes, but they were not defeated. He considered his own life and the risks of helping strangers in such a lawless land. He had seen too many travelers meet misfortune here, robbed, injured, or worse. And yet, something about these sisters stirred a sense of responsibility in him. Perhaps it was the way they had relied on each other, or the way they had carried themselves despite exhaustion. Perhaps it was the recognition that anyone could find themselves in a desperate situation in these unforgiving lands. He stepped closer, cautiously revealing himself, but not too abruptly. The sisters froze, their eyes wide as they recognized the man as a stranger. The older sister reached instinctively for the small knife she carried at her belt, and the younger one clutched the bundles on the mule. He raised his hand slowly, a gesture meant to show he meant no harm. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. The silence of the canyon seemed to grow louder, filled with the tension of uncertainty. Then, without a word, the man turned to his own mule, untying a few straps and removing a small saddle. He gestured toward the sisters and their struggling mule, signaling what he intended. He was offering his best mule, the one that had carried him safely through countless journeys, to help them on their way. The sisters looked at each other in disbelief. Could it be possible that a stranger, a man of the land, would offer them such help? They hesitated, unsure if they could trust him, but the desperation in their eyes overcame their caution. Slowly, carefully, they led their weak mule closer to the man's stronger animal, transferring their bundles and preparing to mount. The man watched them, feeling a mixture of anxiety and hope. He knew that their journey was far from over, that danger could still be waiting around the next bend, but he also knew that he had made the right choice. For the first time in the morning, a small smile crossed his weathered face. He had chosen compassion over fear, humanity over caution. As the sisters mounted the mule and prepared to move forward, he gave them a nod, a silent blessing for their journey. They did not speak, but the gratitude in their eyes was unmistakable. They began to ride down the narrow canyon trail, moving steadily and carefully, guided by the strength and reliability of the man's mule. The canyon seemed to watch them, silent and indifferent, as they disappeared around a bend. The man remained behind, leaning against a rock, watching them go. The morning sun continued its slow climb, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. He could not know what lay ahead for the sisters, nor could he anticipate the challenges they would face. But for now, in that quiet, golden moment, he felt a sense of peace. He had done what he could to help, and that was enough. The canyon returned to silence, the only sound the soft padding of his mule's hooves as he continued along his own path. The encounter had changed something in him, a reminder that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, acts of kindness could ripple far beyond the moment. And though he did not yet know it, the choice he had made would set in motion a chain of events that would bring the sisters and their father together. Before the sun had even set that day, the sisters had barely gone a few hundred steps when the trail began to climb steeply. The canyon walls rose higher on either side, jagged and threatening, and the sun now hung directly overhead, casting sharp, bright light across the rocky path. The older sister tightened her grip on the mule's reins, her eyes scanning every inch of the path ahead. The younger one struggled to keep her balance, shifting nervously in the saddle as the mule stumbled slightly over loose stones. Despite the beauty of the canyon, the golden rocks, the wildflowers clinging to cracks, and the occasional distant bird call, the sisters could feel nothing but fear pressing on them. Their pace was slow but determined, each step bringing them closer to safety, yet the knowledge of what might follow haunted their minds. Every sound made them jump, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant echo of some unseen animal. Their eyes flicked constantly over the trail behind them, as if the shadows themselves might hold the danger they feared. The older sister, tall and cautious, had learned early in life to read the signs of the land. She could tell when a path was unstable, when a river crossing might hide hidden rocks, or when the sun would reach a point that made the trail dangerous. The younger sister, though more timid, was quick and clever. She followed instructions without question, trusting her sister completely, though every small misstep made her heart pound. Together they moved like a single unit, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, each encouraging the other with quiet words or reassuring glances. As they rounded a sharp bend, the older sister caught sight of movement ahead. Another figure, not human, but the shadow of a hawk circling above. The younger one shivered, and the older sister whispered that it was nothing to fear, that the bird was simply looking for food, as it always did. But the sisters both knew that danger often came from where they least expected it, and they urged the mule to move more quickly along the narrow path. Their weak mule struggled with every step, its legs shaking under the weight of the bundles it carried. The man's mule, strong and steady, had made their journey far easier. Without a silent act of kindness, they might never have made it this far. As they rode, the sisters thought of him often, wondering who he was and why he had helped them without asking for anything in return. In a world that could be cruel and unforgiving, it was a rare thing to encounter someone so willing to put themselves at risk for the sake of strangers. But the canyon offered no time for reflection. The older sister's mind was busy, constantly calculating and adjusting. She could hear the faint sound of rushing water somewhere below, likely a stream that could both help and hinder them. If they could reach it, they might refill their water supply, but they would also be exposed, vulnerable to anyone or anything that might be following them. She weighed the risks carefully, knowing that one wrong choice could mean disaster. As the morning stretched on, the sisters began to tire. Their muscles ached and sweat ran down their faces, stinging their eyes. Yet neither of them spoke of giving up. The older sister encouraged her younger sibling with soft, determined words, reminding her to breathe, to focus on the path, to trust in their mule. And the younger sister, though exhausted, pressed forward, inspired by the strength and courage of her sister. Each step was a small victory, each careful movement a triumph against fear and fatigue. Meanwhile, far away from the canyon, their father had learned of their flight. He was a man of quiet strength and deep respect among his people, known for his skill, wisdom, and unwavering devotion to his family. When the news reached him, he wasted no time. His face, usually calm and composed, now bore the tension of urgency. He knew the canyon well, knew the dangers hidden in its shadows, and yet he moved quickly and decisively, determined to reach his daughters before nightfall. He mounted his own horse, a sleek, powerful animal trained for speed and endurance, and set out across the desert. His movements were precise, deliberate, and full of purpose. Every obstacle, rocks, ravines, fallen trees, was met with experience and skill. He knew how to read the land, how to follow the faintest traces of movement, how to anticipate the paths that his daughters might take. The sun beat down on him, and the wind whipped dust into his eyes, but he pushed forward, driven by love and determination that no hardship could weaken. Back in the canyon, the sisters came to a sudden stop. The trail had narrowed into a dangerous ledge, barely wide enough for the mule to pass safely. The younger sister's heart raced as she looked down the steep drop on one side, while the other side was a sheer cliff wall. She glanced at her sister, fear evident in her eyes. The older sister gave a steadying nod, guiding the mule with calm hands. Every step was deliberate, measured, and careful. One misstep here could be catastrophic, yet they moved forward with courage born of necessity. The wind picked up, carrying a strange mix of scents: the earthy smell of the canyon floor, the faint aroma of pine from trees high above, and the ever-present dryness of the sun-scorched land. The sisters paused briefly to rest, letting the mule graze on the sparse vegetation clinging to the rocks. They whispered to each other, sharing fears and hopes in hushed tones. And in those quiet moments, they found strength in their bond. Their journey was not just about survival. It was about trust, courage, and the unspoken promise to protect each other no matter what. Far ahead, the father pressed on. He had learned to read the faintest signs of passage: a broken twig, a disturbed patch of dirt, the subtle imprint of mule hooves. Every clue confirmed his worst fears and his cautious hope at the same time. He moved with urgency, yet with patience, knowing that reckless haste could lead him into danger or cause him to miss the trail entirely. His focus was absolute. His love for his daughters guided every decision, every turn, every leap across the rough terrain. Back in the canyon, the older sister glanced behind them. Her eyes searched the path they had already traveled, but she saw no sign of pursuit. Yet instinct told her to remain vigilant. She tightened her grip on the reins, nudging the mule forward with gentle but firm guidance. The younger sister breathed heavily, trying to steady herself, while silently counting each step, each movement, each careful negotiation of the treacherous terrain. They were not out of danger, not by a long shot, but they were moving. And for now, that was enough. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, then beginning its slow descent. The canyon walls shifted in color, from the bright yellows and oranges of morning to the deeper reds and browns of afternoon. Shadows lengthened, creating a complex pattern across the path. The sisters' determination never wavered, though fatigue weighed heavily upon them. They encouraged each other with soft words, reminding themselves that every step brought them closer to safety, that they were not alone. And far behind them, yet closing in steadily, their father's presence grew nearer. The sisters had no way of knowing it yet, but the safety they sought was closer than they realized. The trail was still dangerous and the challenges ahead were many, but their bond, courage, and the quiet help of a kind stranger had set them on a path toward reunion and protection. For the man who had helped them, the canyon remained silent and vast, a reminder of the fragile balance between danger and mercy. He did not know what lay ahead for the sisters, nor could he predict the father's swift arrival. But his act of kindness had already changed the course of the day. And in the quiet, sunlit canyon, that choice would ripple outward, unseen but powerful, guiding the sisters toward safety and their father toward them with every passing hour. The afternoon sun burned down relentlessly, making the canyon walls glow with a deep reddish hue. The sisters pressed onward, their mules stepping carefully over the jagged rocks and loose gravel. The older sister's hands were calloused and strong from years of hard work, and she guided the mule with patience and precision, making sure every step was safe. The younger sister struggled, her legs aching and her throat dry from the heat, but she refused to complain. She trusted her sister completely, and that trust kept her moving even when her body begged her to stop. As they continued along the narrow trail, the canyon seemed to grow more treacherous. Sharp cliffs rose on one side, while on the other, the ground dropped steeply into shadows that seemed to hide unseen dangers. Every small noise, the snap of a branch, a distant bird call, the shuffle of loose rocks under their mules' hooves, made their hearts race. They were aware of the risks, and yet they had no choice but to keep moving. Stopping meant giving danger a chance to catch up. The older sister glanced back again, hoping to see no one following, though she could not shake a nagging feeling that they were being watched. She whispered a few words of encouragement to her sibling, telling her to stay calm and to focus on the path ahead. The younger sister nodded, her hands gripping the reins tightly, her eyes wide but determined. Together they were a team, each step forward a small victory over fear. Suddenly a sharp cry echoed from the canyon below, a distant, urgent sound that made both sisters freeze. Their mules instinctively slowed, sensing the tension in the air. The older sister whispered for silence, listening carefully. It could have been an animal, or it could have been a warning. Either way, they could not afford to panic. She guided the mule along a safer edge of the trail, keeping close to the canyon wall and moving as quietly as possible. Meanwhile, their father was closing in. He had followed the faint tracks the sisters had left in the soft soil, reading every mark with precision. His eyes were sharp, and his instincts honed by years of living in the wild. He knew that time was against him. The sun would set soon, and darkness in the canyon could make the journey far more dangerous. Yet he moved with care, ensuring that every step brought him closer without risking a mistake. The sisters came to a small plateau, a rare flat area where the mule could rest and graze briefly. The older sister helped her sibling dismount, allowing the younger one to stretch her legs and breathe more easily. They whispered to each other about their plans, discussing which paths to take, which rocks to avoid, and how to keep the mules moving safely. Despite their fear, there was a sense of determination between them, a quiet courage that kept them moving forward. Their father was now only a few miles behind. He could see the faint traces of movement, broken twigs, disturbed dust, the faint tracks of the mules. His heart beat steadily, but with urgency. He knew that the sisters had reached a dangerous part of the canyon, and he feared that if he did not hurry, the shadows of night could make the last stretch impossible to navigate safely. He urged his horse forward, trusting its strength and speed to carry him closer to them. Back on the plateau, the sisters prepared to continue their journey. They adjusted the bundles on the weaker mule, checking that everything was secure. The older sister mounted first, giving the younger sister a hand to climb on safely. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the canyon, and the air was cooler but still dry and dusty. They could feel the day slipping away, and with it, the safety of light. Every step now counted more than ever. As they moved forward, the trail narrowed once again, twisting and turning along the edge of a steep drop. The younger sister's heart pounded with each careful step, and she glanced at her older sibling, seeking reassurance. The older sister gave a small nod, a silent promise that she would keep them both safe. Their journey required every ounce of focus and courage they had, and they were determined not to falter. Meanwhile, the father's journey was not without challenges. The canyon's terrain was unforgiving, and he had to navigate steep inclines, fallen rocks, and sudden drops. He relied on his knowledge of the land, his instincts, and the skill of his horse. Every obstacle was met with precision, every turn calculated to maintain speed without risking safety. His mind was entirely focused on his daughters, and the thought of reaching them before nightfall drove him forward with relentless determination. The sisters reached a narrow passage, a rocky tunnel that twisted and dipped along the canyon wall. Their mules moved slowly, carefully placing their hooves on the uneven stones. The older sister encouraged the younger one to stay calm and follow her lead, whispering that they were almost through the hardest part. The younger sister nodded, though fear still gripped her heart. She trusted her sister completely, and that trust was the only thing keeping her moving steadily along the dangerous trail. Suddenly, a loose rock shifted beneath the younger sister's mule, causing it to stumble slightly. She gasped, her heart racing, but the older sister was quick to react, steadying the reins and guiding the mule carefully. The younger sister took a deep breath, regaining her composure. They both knew that one wrong move here could be disastrous, but they pressed on, step by careful step, their determination outweighing their fear. Far behind them, the father had learned of the treacherous passage through the canyon. He slowed slightly, carefully guiding his horse along safer paths while keeping the trail in sight. Every instinct told him to be patient, to avoid unnecessary risks, and to maintain focus on the ultimate goal, reaching his daughters safely. The canyon demanded respect, and he knew that even a few moments of carelessness could cost precious time or worse. As the afternoon began to fade into evening, the sisters emerged from the rocky tunnel onto a slightly wider plateau. They allowed the mules a moment to rest, breathing heavily from the tension and effort of the journey. The older sister checked the bundles once more, ensuring that everything was secure, while the younger one drank from a small water skin they had carefully rationed throughout the day. Even in exhaustion, they were alert, knowing that danger could appear at any moment. The father's presence grew closer with every passing minute. He had learned to anticipate their moves, predicting which paths they would take and which shortcuts might be tempting. His horse carried him steadily, and he kept his eyes on every detail of the canyon floor. He could see the faint marks of passage, the indentations in the soil, and he knew that his daughters were just ahead. The thought of them, so vulnerable yet determined, strengthened his resolve. The sisters, unaware of their father's proximity, continued carefully along the plateau. The older sister noticed a small stream cutting through the rocks and decided to follow it briefly, hoping it would provide easier footing for the mules. They navigated the stream with care, balancing on rocks and keeping a steady pace. The younger sister clung tightly to her saddle, following her sister's every move with complete trust. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the canyon, the tension grew. Every sound, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, the clink of mule hooves on rock, was amplified in the quiet evening. The sisters moved with caution, their senses sharp, their determination unwavering. They were close to safety, yet the dangers of the canyon were far from over. And then, as the last rays of sunlight kissed the canyon walls, the father finally glimpsed the faint shapes of his daughter's mules moving along the plateau. Relief flooded him, yet he remained focused. The journey was not complete until he reached them, until he could ensure they were truly safe. Every step was deliberate, measured, and careful, yet driven by the urgent need to protect his family. The sisters, still unaware of their father's arrival, pressed forward with quiet determination. The canyon was still dangerous, the trail still treacherous, but their courage and bond carried them onward. They had relied on each other all day, and now, unknowingly, they were about to be met with the presence of someone who loved them beyond measure. In the fading light, the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Every rock, every shadow, every distant sound was part of the story unfolding. The sisters moved steadily, guided by the strength of the mule and the bond between them. The father moved steadily, guided by love and experience. And somewhere in the canyon, the silent act of kindness by a stranger, the man who had given them his best mule, continued to ripple outward, changing the course of the day and bringing father and daughters together as the sun began to set. The canyon was quiet now, except for the soft sound of mule hooves crunching over loose stones and the occasional whistle of the wind through the cliffs. The sisters were tired, their muscles aching from hours of careful navigation along the narrow, treacherous trails. Every step demanded their full attention. The older sister, though exhausted, remained alert, constantly scanning the rocky terrain for signs of danger or obstacles that could throw the mules off balance. The younger sister followed closely, her hands blistered from holding the reins, but her spirit remained determined. They had been traveling all afternoon, moving as quickly as safety allowed. The sun hung low, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and crimson. The older sister knew they had to find a slightly wider path before nightfall, for the mules could not traverse the narrow cliffs safely in darkness. She nudged the stronger mule forward, encouraging it to pick up a steady pace while keeping careful control over the weaker mule carrying their bundles. The younger sister's eyes were heavy with fatigue, yet she refused to look away from the trail ahead. She trusted her sister implicitly, knowing that every decision, every turn, every cautious step was guided by wisdom and experience. But deep down, fear still lingered. Fear of falling, fear of being lost, and fear of the unknown dangers that could appear at any moment. She shook the fear off, reminding herself that they had come this far and could not give up now. Meanwhile, far behind them, their father moved with quiet urgency. He had followed their trail throughout the day, reading every subtle mark in the soil, every broken branch, every faint hoof print. He was careful not to make too much noise, knowing that sudden movements could alarm his daughters or even drive them into a dangerous path. His horse carried him swiftly but steadily, and his eyes, sharp and focused, never strayed from the signs of passage. He was close now. He could feel it in his bones. The sisters reached a rocky outcrop that marked the entrance to a narrow gorge, a path barely wide enough for their mules to pass safely. The older sister guided the animals with extreme care, each step deliberate and precise. Loose rocks threatened to send them sliding, and the canyon wall seemed to close in around them. The younger sister's heart raced as she navigated the treacherous passage, but she pressed on, drawing strength from the calm determination of her sister. They paused briefly to allow the mules to rest, the older sister leaning down to soothe the weaker animal. She whispered words of encouragement, stroking its coat and reassuring it that the trail ahead was not impossible. The younger sister watched, absorbing the quiet confidence her sister exuded. In that moment, she felt a renewed sense of courage, realizing that they were capable of overcoming obstacles together. But even as they paused, the father's presence drew closer. He had learned of the difficult passage and slowed slightly, guiding his horse carefully to avoid injury. Every step was calculated, each movement deliberate, as he moved through the canyon with unwavering focus. His heart pounded not from fear, but from urgency. He knew his daughters were just ahead, and the thought of reaching them safely drove him forward with relentless determination. The sisters continued, carefully negotiating the rocky gorge. The older sister led the way, stepping over uneven stones and guiding the mules with quiet precision. The younger sister followed, her trust in her sibling unwavering. The canyon walls seemed to press closer with each step, and the shadows lengthened, signaling the approach of evening. Every sound, the distant echo of water, the soft clatter of stones underfoot, the wind rustling through the cliffs, heightened their awareness and kept them on edge. Suddenly, the younger sister's mule stumbled over a hidden rock, nearly tipping over. She gasped, her heart leaping, but the older sister reacted instantly, steadying the reins and guiding the mule carefully back onto solid ground. The younger sister took a deep breath, regaining her composure, while the older sister whispered that they were almost through the worst of the gorge. The momentary panic passed, but the sisters knew that the canyon demanded constant vigilance. Far behind them, the father reached the entrance to the gorge. He paused, taking in the narrow, dangerous path ahead. The canyon shadows deepened, and the trail looked even more treacherous from his perspective. He took a moment to steady his horse and himself, then pressed forward, every movement purposeful. He knew that his daughters were somewhere ahead, vulnerable and exhausted, yet capable of navigating the canyon with skill. His determination strengthened with each step, knowing that he would soon reach them. The sisters finally emerged from the gorge onto a slightly wider ledge, a small plateau that allowed the mules to move more freely. They allowed the animals a brief rest, adjusting the bundles and checking that nothing had shifted or fallen. The older sister looked out across the canyon, scanning the path ahead and calculating the remaining distance. She knew they were close to a safer trail, but nightfall was approaching quickly. They had to maintain focus, for a single misstep in darkness could be disastrous. The younger sister drank from the water skin, savoring the small relief it provided. Her throat was dry, her legs ached, and exhaustion pressed heavily on her shoulders. Yet she refused to stop for long, knowing that moving steadily was safer than resting too long. The older sister gave her a reassuring nod, signaling that they were almost at the end of the canyon stretch. The bond between them, strengthened by fear and shared struggle, gave them the courage to continue. The father, now very close, finally glimpsed the faint shapes of his daughter's mules moving along the plateau. Relief washed over him, yet he remained cautious. The canyon still held dangers, and he knew that rushing recklessly could cause a disaster. He guided his horse with care, closing the distance slowly but steadily. His daughters were ahead, and the thought of them, so small and vulnerable, inspired him to move with both urgency and precision. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the canyon, the sisters continued along the plateau. The older sister's mind was focused on every step, every sound, and every movement. She guided the mules carefully, avoiding loose stones and hidden pitfalls, while the younger sister followed faithfully, trusting completely in her sister's judgment. The canyon, once intimidating, seemed almost alive, watching their every movement and testing their courage. And then, just as the sun kissed the tops of the cliffs with the last rays of daylight, the father reached the plateau. From a short distance away, he could see his daughter's mules moving steadily along the path. His heart swelled with relief and joy, yet he did not call out. He knew that sudden noise could startle the animals or alert the sisters to his presence prematurely. Instead, he watched carefully, ensuring that every step he took brought him closer without causing danger. The sisters were still unaware of his presence, but the canyon seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the moment of reunion. The older sister urged the mules forward, whispering to the younger one that the trail was almost clear. The younger sister's heart raced with exhaustion and anticipation, but she pressed on, guided by her sister's steady hand. Finally, the father reached a safe distance where he could step onto the path without startling the mules. He moved carefully, keeping his eyes on his daughters. The older sister noticed a movement in the corner of her vision and instinctively tensed, ready to react if danger appeared. But when she turned fully, she saw the familiar figure of her father approaching. Relief, joy, and gratitude filled her, and for the first time that day she allowed herself to breathe freely. The younger sister looked up, her eyes widening with recognition and happiness. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back, overwhelmed by the presence of her father, who had reached them just as the sun began to set. The mules, sensing the calm and steady energy of the reunion, moved more easily along the path. No longer burdened by fear, the father approached steadily, placing a hand on each daughter in turn, checking that they were unharmed. Words were few, but his eyes spoke volumes. Relief, love, and pride shone in his gaze, and the sisters understood without needing explanation. They had made it through the canyon, guided by courage, trust, and the quiet help of a stranger whose kindness had given them a chance at safety. In the fading light, the family stood together, taking a moment to rest and appreciate the journey they had endured. The canyon around them was silent, holding the memory of the day's trials and triumphs. The father led the mules along a safer path, guiding his daughters carefully as night approached. Together they moved forward, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. The man who had given them his mule remained far behind, unseen but still part of the story. His quiet act of kindness had changed the course of the day, allowing the sisters to survive and reunite with their father. In the vast, unforgiving canyon, his generosity had left a ripple that carried hope, courage, and safety to those who needed it most. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the canyon cliffs, leaving a soft, golden glow that slowly faded into the cool hues of evening. The air was quiet, still carrying the scent of dust, sagebrush, and the faint traces of the day's heat. The sisters and their father stood together for a moment on the small plateau, breathing heavily from exhaustion, but filled with relief. The fear and tension that had pressed on them all day slowly melted away now that they were reunited. Their father's presence was a comfort, a protective shield against the dangers of the canyon that still lingered in the shadows. The older sister looked over at her younger sibling, who was quietly wiping sweat and dust from her face. Relief shone in her eyes, and a small, tired smile crossed her lips. She realized that, though the day had tested them in ways they could never have imagined, they had survived together. Each step along the treacherous trail, every stumble and moment of fear, had strengthened their bond. She whispered softly to her sister, words that carried love, encouragement, and a quiet pride. The younger sister, exhausted but elated, nodded in understanding, the weight of the day's trials slowly lifting from her shoulders. Their father approached with a calm, steady presence, his eyes, sharp and watchful throughout the day, now softened as he looked at his daughters. He had felt fear and urgency with every step he had taken, yet his focus never wavered. Seeing them safe and unharmed brought a profound relief, deeper than words could express. He gently took their hands, checking them for any injuries, and spoke softly, reassuring them that they were now safe. The sisters, overwhelmed with gratitude, clung briefly to him, understanding that his dedication had carried them through the day. Though the canyon was still vast and shadowed, the immediate danger had passed. The father led the sisters and the mules along a safer path, moving steadily toward the edge of the canyon, where the terrain flattened and the journey would become less perilous. Every step was careful yet purposeful as he guided them through the final stretch. The sisters followed, leaning on their strength and trust in their father, every movement lighter now that fear no longer dominated their thoughts. As they walked, the older sister's mind drifted briefly to the man who had given them his mule earlier that day. He had appeared without warning, a quiet figure in a harsh landscape, yet his simple act of kindness had changed the course of their lives. She wondered if they would ever see him again, and whether he understood the importance of what he had done. His generosity had allowed them to navigate the canyon safely, to endure the obstacles that had threatened to stop them, and ultimately, to reunite with their father before darkness fell. The younger sister, listening to her older sibling's quiet thoughts, nodded in agreement. She had felt the same gratitude, though she could not find the words to express it fully. The fear she had experienced earlier in the day was now replaced by an awareness of how fragile life could be and how vital small acts of kindness were. Together they moved forward, their mule steady beneath them, and their hearts lightened by the knowledge that they had survived against the odds. The canyon seemed to acknowledge the end of their trials. The harsh cliffs softened in the fading light, shadows stretching long and peaceful across the rocky floor. The wind, once sharp and threatening, now carried a gentle cooling touch, rustling through the sagebrush and whispering through the canyon walls. The sisters walked quietly beside their father, absorbing the serene beauty of the canyon at sunset, and for the first time that day, they felt a sense of calm and safety. They reached a small clearing where the trail widened enough for the mules to move freely. Here, the father paused, allowing the sisters to rest once more. They dismounted, letting their legs stretch after hours of riding in careful balance. The older sister tended to the mules, checking their hooves for rocks and injuries, while the younger one refilled their water skin from a small stream nearby. Though exhaustion still clung to them, there was an undeniable sense of triumph in their movements. They had survived a day of fear, challenge, and uncertainty, and now the canyon seemed almost like a friend rather than a threat. The father sat down on a flat rock, motioning for the sisters to join him. The three of them shared a quiet moment, the only sounds being the gentle trickle of water and the soft whisper of wind. He spoke softly, reminding them of the importance of staying alert and careful, but also acknowledging their courage and resilience. The sisters listened, their hearts swelling with gratitude and love. They had relied on each other, and they had relied on their father's strength and wisdom, and together they had made it through a day that could have ended in tragedy. As darkness slowly approached, the father guided them further along the canyon, now leading toward a trail that would take them out of the canyon entirely. The sisters followed closely, their movements more relaxed now, their confidence restored. They moved with a rhythm, the trust between them and their father unspoken but strong. Every step was purposeful, yet lighter than before, the fear of earlier moments replaced by the satisfaction of having persevered. In the quiet of the evening, the older sister again thought of the man who had helped them. Though they had never spoken at length, his presence had been a beacon in a difficult day. She imagined him returning to his solitary life in the canyon, unaware of the peace and safety his act had brought them. She felt a quiet gratitude, understanding that true courage and kindness often went unrecognized, yet had the power to change lives in ways that were profound and lasting. The younger sister, walking beside her sister, shared a similar reflection. She realized that the day's events had taught her more than she could have learned in months of ordinary life. She had faced fear, relied on courage, and experienced the power of kindness and family bonds. Every shadow, every obstacle, every careful step along the canyon had strengthened her resolve, and she felt a quiet pride in her own endurance and in the bond she shared with her sister. The father, aware of their reflections and their fatigue, spoke softly about the journey ahead. He reminded them that while the canyon had been conquered, there were still paths to travel, and life required careful attention, courage, and respect for the land. The sisters listened intently, absorbing his wisdom, knowing that it would guide them long after they had left the canyon behind. As night fell completely, the family found a safe spot to rest. They tended to the mules, ensuring they were comfortable and secure for the evening. They built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled, and sat together, sharing a quiet meal of simple provisions. The warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth they felt in their hearts, knowing that the dangers of the day had been overcome and that they were together, safe and unhurt. The sisters spoke quietly of the day's events, recalling moments of fear, moments of courage, and the kindness of the stranger who had given them his mule. Their father listened, nodding in understanding, proud of their resilience and resourcefulness. Though the day had been exhausting, it had strengthened the bonds between them all. They had learned that trust, courage, and kindness could guide them even in the harshest of landscapes. As the fire crackled softly, the older sister stood for a moment and looked toward the direction where the stranger had disappeared earlier in the day. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope, imagining that he might continue his solitary journey with the quiet knowledge that his kindness had made a difference. She whispered a silent thank you, feeling that even though he might never know, his act had been important, and it would be remembered in their hearts forever. The younger sister sitting beside her placed a hand on her sister's arm. She nodded, understanding the sentiment completely. Words were unnecessary. They shared a quiet acknowledgement that the stranger's generosity had allowed them to survive and to reunite with their father. The canyon, once threatening and dangerous, now felt like a place where courage, trust, and kindness could prevail. Finally, the father looked at his daughters, his eyes reflecting pride, love, and relief. He spoke softly, telling them that while the day had tested them, it had also shown the strength of family, the importance of courage, and the unexpected ways that kindness could appear. The sisters listened quietly, feeling the truth of his words resonate within them. They had survived the canyon, not alone, but together, with each other, with their father, and with the help of a stranger whose quiet generosity had given them a chance at safety. As the night deepened, the family rested, secure in the knowledge that the trials of the day had passed. The canyon, silent and vast around them, held the memories of courage, fear, and kindness. And though darkness had fallen, the bonds they shared, the lessons they had learned, and the strength they had gained would continue to guide them long after the canyon itself had faded from view. In that quiet moonlit moment, the sisters knew that their journey through the canyon had changed them forever. They had faced fear, endured hardship, and experienced kindness in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. And they had learned, most importantly, that courage, trust, and love, both given and received, could light the darkest path, carrying them safely through even the most challenging of days.